Let's tear down this Röhm Model 38S revolver.
Hi, I'm Jim Humphrey from Imminent Threat Defense Firearms Training, and I've got something a little unusual today. This is a Röhm RG38S, 38 caliber revolver. If you haven't heard of Röhm before, no big surprise. They pretty much went out of business in the 80s. But they manufactured a very large line of handguns, and they were kind of known for being on the less expensive side, shall we say. They're still around today. This one had a little mechanical problem when it was brought to me, so I had to fix that. But let's have a look inside.
As always, before we begin any work on a firearm, we're going to remove all live ammunition from the work area and thoroughly inspect and check the firearm is unloaded and safe to work on. The grip panel is held on with 3 different screws. They're some different sizes, so I'll keep track of that. To get the cylinder out, we're going to just have to remove this one cylinder crane screw. With the cylinder separated, we'll set that aside. So to get the 2 halves of the receiver apart, we have to first remove the thumb piece and then knock that pin out. And there's a screw back here, which the mainspring's got to be removed. So let's take the thumb piece off first. So the handle of the frame pin knocks out pretty easily. It's a smooth pin, but I'm using brass tools as much as possible. This is the finish on this frame is not blued. It's some sort of paint type surface, and it scratches pretty easily. The handle of the frame screw is kind of hidden back inside the grip frame. Now, in order to separate the 2 halves, I have to cock the hammer just a little bit, which means I have to pull back on the safety lever, which where the thumb piece was connected to. So I'll pull it back with a pin, and with this hammer partly cocked, I can pull the 2 halves apart. The pins for the hammer, the trigger, and the cylinder stop pretty much hold all the parts in. But there are some little tiny bits here that I have to keep very careful track of, like the plunger here for the hand, and the little spring here for the safety lever. And inside the cylinder stop, there's a spring and a very small ball bearing. When I start pulling apart, I'm going to keep track of all those things. The mainsprings move pretty much like any other coil mainspring. The spring guide has a hole in the end of it, so I'll push back on the safety, cock the hammer all the way back, compress that spring, and then the hole is exposed, and I can put a little wire in it to hold it. Once the wire's in place, I can release the hammer. That'll keep the spring in compression, and it more or less just falls out. Disassembly of the lower is pretty much just a matter of knocking those 3 pins out and keeping track of all the parts as they come loose. I'm careful to get that safety lever spring out, which was hidden back in this hole, and also that hand plunger spring, which could get stuck back in those holes in a dirtier gun and then fall out inadvertently and be lost forever. Same thing with the cylinder stop. Once I pull the pin out and I remove my punch, I'm very careful to keep it covered because there's a ball bearing in there in a spring, which is a ball bearing in particular is pretty easy to lose. I removed the trigger spring by just getting a hold of one leg and giving it a twist and pulling it out. Okay, I got all the parts from the lower receiver laid out here. Let's go through a little nomenclature. So we got the hand, the cylinder stop, the ball and spring and pin for it. Then we have the hand plunger and its spring. We have the hammer safety, the trigger pin, the frame, and the trigger spring. Then we have the safety lever and its real spring. And, of course, the hammer and hammer pin. Assembly is pretty much the reverse of the disassembly. I'm going to twist this trigger spring in. The cylinder stop is very tricky. Lots of finicky parts to be pushed into very small spaces. Back side of the trigger, you see there's little cross pins here, and one leg of the trigger spring has to get underneath that cross pin, and it just doesn't want to stay there. You'll see several times during the process I have to readjust it. The hand and the hammer safety fit on these two little studs in the side of the trigger, and once it's slipped inside the frame, they'll stay in place. Then I'll push that leg of the trigger spring up over that cross pin, which I'll do several times, as you'll see, and then put the trigger pin in to hold everything in place. The hand spring and the hand spring plunger can be slipped in alongside the hand and pressed in behind them. It's a little tricky to keep them lined up. They will come out if I push on that hand sideways. Next, the safety lever and spring. Spring fits in that little hole in the frame, and then the hammer pin will hold that safety lever and the hammer in position. Now I have to reset that trigger spring one more time, and the hand plunger because it fell out. All right, now I'm ready to put that mainspring back in. So it just drops in. And I have to put back the hammer safety and pull the hammer back to compress the spring, and then pull out that retaining wire that I have holding the spring. Now I removed the rear sight. This is not something I'd actually recommend. There's a little sight adjustment screw. And then the rear sight is actually being pressed on by a spring, so you have to pull the rear sight back to compress the spring and then lift out the rear sight. Notice I'm very careful to cover that hole because that spring is very easy to launch across the room, and it's a very tiny spring. Getting it back into place was even more challenging, so I built a little special tool out of a staple so that I can reach in with the rear sight in place with that tool, and I can compress the spring and drop the rear sight in. Kind of a tricky process, so I set it up in the vise. I put the adjustment screw in just ever so much so that it would keep the spring from launching out that hole and across my workbench. So I can compress the spring with that staple and then drop that rear side in. So to get the two halves back together again, I push on the hammer safety just a little bit, cock the hammer just about halfway, just to line up. Then I have to reset the cylinder stop, make sure it's locked down position, and then the two halves will go back together. So there's not much left to it now. Just put in that frame pin. Give it a couple of taps. It's a smooth pin. And then the frame screw. Then I can put the thumb piece back in place and do a quick function check, and then we'll have a look at the cylinder. So by looking at the stop lugs on the cylinder, you can tell which way the cylinder will rotate. And so this one's going to rotate counterclockwise as you look at it from the back. And that will tell me which way the ejector rod has to turn. That's a general rule anyways. So this is a left-hand thread ejector rod. This one's a little tricky. There's nothing to hold that attachment pin when I turn the ejection rod. So I put a pair of smooth jawed pliers on it and used my screwdriver a bit like an impact wrench and impacted it, the ejector rod, so I could unfasten it. You can see I'm turning it to the right. Now removing the ejector rod screw required a custom-made screwdriver. I use a couple of shell casings to give some support to the star, and then it just threads out. Okay, let's go through a little nomenclature here. Of course, we got the cylinder, the ejector, the attachment spring, the attachment pin. It's got a little tiny E-clip on it, which I was not game to take off. The pressure spring, the crane, ejector rod screw, and the ejector rod. Reassembly is pretty much just the reverse. The ejector has a little slot cut in it that has to line up with the tab and the cylinder, make everything fit smoothly. The pressure spring looks pretty symmetrical, but I noticed one end seemed to be a fit a little bit tighter than the other end, so I did find it was directional the way it went in. I'm going to use that same trick on an ejector rod. I'm going to use a little impact motions with my screwdriver to get it to tighten up a little bit. It doesn't have to be too exceptionally tight. As it rotates in normal operation, the cylinder will keep that ejector rod tight. Alrighty then, reinstall the cylinder and the cylinder crane screw. Do a quick function check and reinstall the grips. That's about all there is to it.
Well, I hope you found that interesting. I'm Jim Humphrey from Imminent Threat Defense Firearms Training, and as always, enjoy your firearms, keep training, and be safe out there. Thanks for watching.